Let's paint some strawberries with watercolor. Welcome to Art with Viv. Now today I've already sketched out my strawberries, and I've sketched out sort of a plaid napkin underneath. And I am wetting those strawberries with a little bit of clean water, and then I'm going to take some cadmium yellow and just drop it in there. And just let the water carry it this way and that way and wherever. Now don't cover the whole thing with the yellow. Leave a few spots of the white paper looking through, and that'll give you some nice highlights and a little bit of definition and some depth and a little bit it gives you a nice surface to work on. So you'll get all of the strawberries, you'll put the clean water on and then drop in the cadmium yellow. And then in some areas I'm just picking up a little bit of the yellow just to let more of the white of the paper show through. And for the background for that napkin I've got underneath it, or cloth, whatever it is, I don't know, I haven't decided. I'm just going to paint the stripes with a nice cobalt teal. And I'm going to get all of those painted. I want them to be pretty pale. Just painting right onto the paper. And you want to do every other row for your stripes, and just enjoy the process. Once you get all the stripes painted, come back in some of the, like every other square, just put another layer of that teal blue over it to darken it up, because that's, that just indicates where the blues cross over each other. So of course they're going to be a little bit darker. So you'll want to do that and get each, like every other square, and it's only on the lines that cross over each other, the squares that cross over the two blue lines that cross over each other in those squares, that's where you want to make it a little bit darker, just like a gingham check would look. And I decided for the background, I want it to be a little bit darker, and it's sort of still that blue-green look of the teal, but it's a little more toward the blue than the green, and it's a much darker color. And I am going to darken that background up with that. I still want it to be in the same color range. I just wanted it to be a little darker to give it some contrast. So you'll want to go ahead and just paint in that background underneath the napkin and get that all in nice and dark. And you may have to do more than one layer. It's up to you. I did more than one layer and got it really dark. Now once the strawberries are completely dry, the yellow's completely dry, go ahead and re-wet them and then just drop in some rose, some permanent rose, all into the water and let it flow over. Let a little bit of that yellow peek out. You want some of the yellow to show just to give it some depth and some, difference of color so that it's just not a flat red berry. So you let that orange sort of shine through a little bit in some spots. And it also gives that berry a little bit of a glow to have that yellow underpainting. So you'll want to just wet each strawberry just like I did this one. Drop in that rose color. Maybe pick up a little bit of the rose so that a little more of the yellow will shine through on some. And then we're going to let those berries dry once we get them all painted red. Just darkening up a few more of the squares. And I told you I put a few layers on the background. I wanted it to be a high contrast. I wanted that bright brown to be really dark. So I went ahead and put another layer once that one dried of that sort of blue-green, aqua blue color. And that really makes that napkin or gingham check napkin, whatever you want it to be. I just wanted the actual pattern of it. That was my main thing in the color. And that really makes it pop to be so dark right next to that napkin with all of its beautiful white and light blue squares. Once you get that background in, you're going to let that dry some. And then I'm just taking a little bit of the yellow that I used, the cadmium yellow, a little bit of sap green, mixing it together to get a pale green. I'm also using sap green on its own without a mixture, and then some of the sap green mixed with that dark blue that I used on the background. And the first thing I'm going to do is on each of the leaves on the tops of the strawberries, I'm just going to paint in that pale yellow green first. Just get a nice wash of that on all of those green leaves on each strawberry. Then once that is dry, once that pale green is dry, you can come back and with a little bit of the darker mixture, the medium mixture, you can start putting in details and shadows onto your beautiful little strawberry caps here. And you can even blend it out. I'm using a number 2 Creative Mark synthetic squirrel brushes. That's what I'm using, the set of Creative Mark Mimic faux squirrel brushes or synthetic squirrel brushes. It's not real squirrel, in other words, but they do hold a lot of water and a lot of paint. So a beginner might need to be a little careful with that because it can get a little hard to control if you're not used to controlling your water and how much water you need to use. So just be real careful if you use those kind of brushes and you're a beginner. Now I'm just putting in all those little details, working my way around and putting in the nice little shadows. And we'll continue to do that until we're finished getting in all the little details. And once I finished with all those little green details and shadows, I decided that I needed those berries to be darker. So I took a little bit of that rose color and I mixed it with just a little bit of a permanent magenta to make it a little bit darker. Wet the strawberry and just sort of floated some of that darker color over where I wanted it to have shadows and to be a little bit darker. Really just following my instincts. I didn't have a reference photo. These are just sort of strawberries from the imagination. I just drew them from my imagination and sort of placed them where I wanted to. Now while it's still wet, you can add a little bit more of the yellow back into it, and then I just blended it with the tip of my brush. And then I'm going to go ahead and darken each one of the strawberries and add a little bit of yellow where I think that it needs it. And then I'm going to let those dry once I get all the shadows and all of the yellow where I want it to give it a nice little punch of color. Now I want to add the seeds, and this is my palette where I've got the shavings from my water-soluble pastels, or I like to call them watercolor crayons, and I've mixed the yellow ochre with a little bit of just plain yellow to get sort of a brownish yellow, and I'm just taking my small number 2 brush and just adding seeds across the surface of the berry. Now make sure your berries dry before you do this, or they will just bleed into that red. And the reason I'm using the crayon, the watercolor crayon, is because it acts a lot like gouache. If you have gouache, use that. If you have colored pencil, you can use colored pencil. If you have watercolor pencil, you can use that to make your seeds. Totally up to you. I'm just using my watercolor crayons because they are thick and opaque like gouache, or you can make them thick and opaque like gouache. And I didn't feel like rounding up my gouache and getting that all out, so I just did it with my watercolor crayon, my little palette. So I've got those on. I'm gonna let those dry. I want to go ahead and put a little shadow underneath the strawberries, so I sort of wet underneath them, and then I took a little bit of ultramarine blue and mixed it with some of that rose color and just made a shadow around the berries where I thought that a shadow might be. Then I'm taking some of the Mr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White and just adding some highlights onto the berries, where I think highlights would be making sure I go around the seeds, getting the shape of the seeds. Again, using my number 2 brush, really small, and just remember it's not going to dry as white as it looks right here. It will sort of melt a little bit into that reddish color. I'm also getting a little bit of that reddish color and sort of mixing it with the edges of the white just to make it a smoother blend. And I'm just going to do that to each one of the strawberries just to give it a little highlight. And we have almost finished our fresh juicy strawberries, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, please consider giving me a thumbs up, subscribing, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any videos. Thank you for watching, and please consider sharing with someone that likes art as much as we do. Thank you.